Hello and welcome back to class. In today's tutorial video, I'm going to be demonstrating how to create an accordion book. The accordion book is going to be used for Project 5, Narrative Intervention. This video is going to be broken down into two main components. First and foremost, we're going to dive into what we are going to use for our cover for our accordion book. We're going to talk about essentially how to find chipboard, where it can be used, how it can be cut down, some gluing tips and crafting tips, and how to make this an affordable kind of backing for an accordion book. Then we're going to dive into how to select a book cover, treatments for book cover, paper that you can use, and good general crafting tips for making very basic kind of covers for books. After that, we're going to go into the last part of the video where I talk about how to create our accordion paper. We're going to talk about papers, different folding techniques, different gluing techniques, and all of those good crafting techniques to create one finished and well-made accordion book. So I hope you enjoy the video. Let's dive in.
Let's go ahead and begin with looking at some student example works. These are, of course, 4 different accordion books that were all made in my 2019 class for 2D design. The writing prompt or kind of art prompt for this particular assignment was a journey. So for your example, you have a different writing or art prompt, so please make sure that you are keeping up with your project sheet and that you are responding to the correct prompt. But I wanted to show you just how different and diverse and beautiful these books can really be. Students have handled them very differently in the past classes that I have taught this, and has turned out to be one of the most successful projects from this class. So I hope you really can get excited with your writing prompt and really turn this project into your own. As you can see, I'm just flipping through different types of books here to see how students have handled that work. As you can see, some of them are really multimedia, even collage based. Some of them are really nicely drawn works, is the one that I'm showing here. And as you can see, they're fully completed accordion books that are really well crafted. As you can see, they all are connected through one entire page, and of course that one connecting page is then attached to the front and end of the accordion book. So these are just some really good examples, and I thought it was really important just to show you how some students have handled this project in the past, so you can get a better kind of idea and understanding for this particular assignment. This one is a lot more creative in some ways and a lot more kind of experimental. We see that there's a variety of different collage and mixed media processes happening in this book. And in fact, they didn't cut the interior pages. If you look at the top and bottom, they're actually a little bit frayed, so they were slightly torn. It was a controlled tear, but you can also do this in addition. My video demo that I'm going to be demonstrating is going to have just cut pages, but there's a variety of different ways that you can do this project. You can use some mixed media in here if you would like, and you can also play with the way you are cutting or even cutting into the page for this particular assignment. Please make sure to also look at some of those great student examples that I provided you on your project sheet for additional kind of examples. This is another type of accordion book. Of course, this is responding once again to the prompt of a journey. So as you can see, this is almost quite literal, and it has a really beautiful kind of drawn and painter sensibility to it, with maps and kind of iconic scenes and symbols of travel. And then, of course, on the back, it has those wonderful kind of postcard kind of symbols. So this is just one way to kind of complete this narrative and really have fun with this assignment. Let's go ahead and dive into the crafting of our accordion book.
All right, so we're going to go ahead and dive into how to create bookends for your accordion book. So we're going to be talking about how to select chipboard, cut chipboard down, and then we're going to talk about covers in this section of the video.
Let's go ahead and start with talking about the substrate that we're going to use to create both the front and back cover of your book. That substrate is going to be a product called chipboard. Chipboard is a relatively inexpensive and very easy to find product that is very strong and has some really great properties for bookmaking. Chipboard is actually pretty much found exclusively in the back of sketchbooks or drawing paper pads. So since we already have some drawing pads that have been purchased for this class, this is going to be the material used for our front and back ends of our book covers. Traditionally, chipboard has been used for a variety of different crafting and fine art kind of categories, but it makes for a really great book cover and can be seen through a variety of different bookmaking processes. So I'm going to go ahead and just strip off my chipboard from my paper pad. As you can see, I have a spiral bound paper drawing pad, and I'm just simply removing the spines from the paper, which is connected to my chipboard. If you have a spine that is paper and glue, just simply remove it by either an X-Acto knife or really delicately tearing the chipboard away from your paper pad.
Chipboard is a notoriously hard board to cut, so that means you're going to have to change your blade and be very diligent with your cutting. And in some senses, this is a harder board than even our mat boards. So you're going to have a really hard time cutting over this. So you're going to need to make sure that A, you have a new fresh blade, you're cutting on a mat board, and that you're doing a really good job with just making sure you're lining up your cut each time you go over it. So in some senses, you can think about all of that practice for matting our boards leading up to this moment, because you're going to really need those cutting and crafting skills when it comes to cutting down your chipboard for the cover of your books. Also, make sure to allocate extra space in case you mess up on your cuts. Whenever working with a new material, as I mentioned, it's really important to make sure that if there's a mistake that happens, that you have some extra wiggle room on some of that material, so you can maybe make a third or fourth cover in case, like I said, you screw up on the cut and something goes disastrously wrong, right? So make sure you allocate enough space for your board covers. Let's go ahead and talk about the cutting.
First off, you're going to need an X-Acto knife with a new blade. I would recommend having some extra blades on hand in case they break while cutting. You're going to also need a mat for cutting, as well as a ruler and mark-making instrument such as a 2H pencil. When cutting down both our front and back cover of the book, we have to think about how our accordion pages are going to sit in between our book covers. Now, some students like to have it a kind of flush ratio. What I mean is that their paper inside is 6x6 and their covers are 6x6. I personally like to have a little bit of a lip dividing my paper from the actual book cover. I just think that leaves for a better aesthetic appeal and just a better crafted kind of quality book. So what I do is I'm going to cut down my cover of my books, both the front and back end, and just add 1/4 of an inch to my 4x6 measurement. This means each page in my book is going to be measured 4x6, and my cover is going to be 4 1/4 and 6 1/4. This will allocate 1/8 of an inch on all four sides of my book. Personally, this is an aesthetic that I like. I just like a little bit of lip between my page and my cover. Of course, you can make this a flush book if you want, meaning that your pages are 4x6 and your cover is 4x6. If you want to go ahead and create a little lip like I'm doing, go ahead and feel free to use my measurements. I'm going to finish my cutting of my book cover down. As you can see, I started with my longer measurement. That will allocate me some additional inches in case I screw up and I need to cut down a second or third cover for my front and back ends of my book covers. As you can see, the scrap is sitting on the right hand side, just a little bit off of the frame, and I'm going to go ahead and create or separate my front and back cover now by dividing this space. I am once again dividing this out, and this is going to measure 4 1/4 widthwise. All right, so now that my chipboard is successfully cut down to the 4 1/4 by 6 1/4 dimension, I'm going to go ahead and finish my front and back book covers and place a paper cover on top of my chipboard. So we're going to need a variety of different things here for this particular section of the book crafting area. I've had a lot of students really handle the way they choose to finish their books in terms of a cover in a variety of different ways. I've had some students use periodicals or magazine images. I've had some students collage. I've had some students use paintings or drawings as their type of book cover. And really, it's going to be up to you and what type of message you would like to convey with the front of your book. Now, of course, you can think about this in terms of that wonderful adage, of don't read a book by its cover. But I want you to really think about this in terms of a fine art piece. So think about the materials that you're using. How are we going to be able to craft a cover that is going to both conceptually and formally convey the ideas that we're trying to capture for our project prompt? So really think about how you're crafting your narrative, how you're designing your story to go inside the pages of your book to be mirrored on the outside of your cover. So let's go ahead and dive into some examples, just a couple of source examples here for how we can use our book covers as a window into our story to conceptually convey our narratives. All right, we can use a variety of different images. As you can see, great resource material for you, our magazine, images, book images that you find that are made from decent quality paper, so they'll withstand some wear and tear. You can also think about maps and other good source materials that might not be conventionally kind of used for a book, but that will make interesting textures and good book covers. Also, things that you can try too are things out of the box or kind of stretch that creative mind of yours, and maybe even think about using some untraditional materials such as tracing paper, which is a little bit more transparent. You can think about putting glitter or different types of scrap paper inside of some transfer paper, and then each time you rotate that book cover or rotate the book, possibly some of that material inside could shift or lightly move around. You could think about creating pockets or little areas where there might be packets or baggies that sit on top of your cover that has some extra materials that kind of wiggle around on top. So there's a variety of ways that you can make a cover for your book. Now, I'm going to go ahead and demonstrate a proper technique for cutting, crafting, and gluing a paper cover to a chipboard substrate. Depending upon the paper you select to be your cover, you're going to have to think about the glue that you use to attach it. Now, if it's 100+ pound weighted paper, you're going to use a white tacky glue, or in my case, I'm using Yes Paste. If it is a lighter or delicate weight paper, I would recommend using a glue stick. And like I said, this is always going to vary just depending upon your paper type. So go ahead and do some tests if you're not sure. Like I said, that general principle of 100+ pounds, use white tacky glue. If it is under 100 pounds, I would recommend using a glue stick. And if you're unsure, go ahead and use some of that paper and just do a small sample on the side. Now, using the right glue is going to be really critical for ensuring good craft and a good cover for your book. After you've decided on a book cover, whether that be an image from a magazine, a drawing, a painting that you have made or have drawn out on a piece of paper, or a collage that you make, you're going to have to go ahead and cut that out and secure it to your chipboard. So let's go ahead and talk about the math and kind of give you a understanding of how this cover is going to wrap around your chipboard base. So first off, I'm going to just go ahead and draw out some little examples for you, and then we'll go ahead to the demo section where I show you how to make the book cover. But first, let's go ahead and just break down the math real quick. Accordion book and accordion book covers are relatively easy to make in terms of the bookmaking world. So let's go ahead and just break down the math real simply. So first off, we're going to go ahead and start with our base measurement, which is going to be our board that we're using, aka our chipboard, which is, for me, 4 1/4 and 6 1/4. And we're essentially going to create a paper cover that is going to add 2 inches to that base measurement. So it's going to equal 6 1/4 by 8 1/4. Essentially, we're just creating an inch lip for the paper cover to fold over our chipboard. Now, in addition, we're also going to have to cut off the corners as I am illustrating here in the work. As you can see, they're just circled here really simply. Essentially, we're going to leave about 1/4 of an inch of space to provide us enough room so we can create really nice folds that don't expose our interior chipboard core. These 2 images are the images that I have selected to be my book cover for my accordion book. As you can see, I'm just simply placing my chipboard on top of the areas that I'm wanting to use for my book cover. I'm going to go ahead and show you kind of a tip for kind of citing this out a little bit better to make sure that you're actually able to use the image perspective or section that you're wanting to use without having to damage your book cover image. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to essentially turn the image over, put my chipboard on the area where I think I want to grab, and then I'm just going to essentially move this chipboard around till I find the right area or the right composition. And then I'm essentially going to lightly fold the paper over, creating some small indentations or creases in the paper. This is going to help me for placement of my chipboard later when I go to mark out the impression of my chipboard where it sits on the back of the page. You want to make sure that you're always drawing on the back of the image that you will be using for your cover if you are working from a photograph like I am. So essentially now what I'm going to do is outline my chipboard with a 2H pencil. This is dark enough for me to see, but it might not register on the video frame. As you can see, it kind of is slightly showing up there at the bottom, but I am just simply marking out my placement of my chipboard. From here, I'm going to then measure out 1 inch from this space. Remember, this is going to be the leaves that fold over, creating my cover page to go over my chipboard cover. So once again, I'm just going to mark this out here. I'm going to be doing 1 inch. Some book crafters like to do other measurements. I'm just going to be using 1 inch though for my measurements. From my outline of my chipboard on the back of the image that I am selecting for my cover, I am simply going to just measure out 1 inch on both the left, right, top, and bottom sides of that outline. Double check your work and make sure that your measurement is true on all sides, and make sure that you're measuring evenly 1 inch on top, bottom, left, and right sides of the image. Once you're done with this, simply cut your image out. Your measurement should be 6 1/4 by 8 1/4. Remember, all we're doing is adding essentially 2 inches to our total base measurement, which for me was 4 1/4 by 6 1/4. So if we add 2 on that, that's going to equal 6 1/4 by 8 1/4. All right, so what we're going to do now is we're going to introduce a new tool in our arsenal for crafting and bookmaking, and essentially this is called a bone folder. Now, bone folders are kind of a bookmaking tool that is really needed in a bookmaking arsenal, but most students don't have bone folders, and I'm not requiring you to go out and buy one. Obviously, if we were in a face-to-face class, you could use the ones that I provide you in the studio, but instead, what you're going to do is you're going to go ahead and raid your kitchen pantries or stores and find a nice butter knife, something with a really, really dull edge. Preferably, if you have a plastic knife, this would work even better. What I am doing right now is I am lightly scoring the paper, going back and forth, providing even but light pressure with my knife and just lightly scoring the paper. This is where the bone folder is going to be really, really important for your bookmaking craft. And this might seem like a step that you might want to miss, but if you do, I promise you'll have crafting issues later down the line. Essentially, when you score the paper like this, it's going to allow for a much easier and more successful bend and fold of the paper when you go to create those lips and leaves of your paper later. Now, I am here using just the pads of my fingertips, and I am just lightly bending the paper and creasing it over as I move my fingers back and forth over the paper. Now I'm just lightly grabbing the paper, just providing a little bit more tension. Now, as I have kind of worked over the paper with my bone folder, creating that really nice line, the paper is very smoothly and easily transitioning over the chipboard base. And like I said, this is going to be a really important step, so please make sure that you are, using your bone folder to create these kind of creases and indents. Now, as you can see, I've got a really nice indented page, and you can perfectly see this really nice creased outline that my chipboard will comfortably fit into. All right, so let's get on to the next important step, and that is creating our finished cover. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually take our rectangle shape book cover that we have cut out, and we're going to actually cut off the corners of the page. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure from the corner of my chipboard out 1/4 of an inch, and then from there I'm going to draw a line creating a triangle. So essentially just watch the demo if you're a little bit confused by this. Right now, as you can see, I just take the ruler, put it right where that corner crease is on my page, measure out 1/4 of an inch, and then from there I create a diagonal line, creating a nice triangle. Then essentially once I'm done with all the triangles on all 4 corners of my book cover page, I will then essentially just cut them out with a pair of scissors. Make sure that you follow that line and make sure it's nice and even. This is going to be really, really important that you follow this step as well. Essentially your corners, like anything else when we're in art, whether this is making a canvas or whether that's in book arts, your corners are always going to be the most challenging part of the crafting process. So to eliminate some of that excess paper, we're going to go ahead and just remove those corners. So if we don't remove the corners, you're going to have a lot of clunky folded kind of corners. Your craft is going to be really off, and most likely your page will not only not look good, but it'll also be weaker structurally, because if we have a lot of goopy kind of paper that's unevenly stacked, the likelihood of it falling apart later down the line is a lot higher. So this is going to not only maintain good presentation quality, but also good crafting quality. So now that I've got all of my triangles on the corners cut out or marked, I'm going to go ahead and cut them out with a pair of scissors. Now, obviously, I am being very cautious when I'm using my scissors, making sure that I am following the line. And obviously, don't put your fingers in the scissors path, right? So make sure you're also following good safety tips. But I'm just going to go ahead and cut these corners out, and I'm going to then be able to glue my paper cover onto my chipboard substrate. I'm going to go ahead and fit in my chipboard to my book cover, and I'm just going to lightly kind of fold over my corners now. I'm going to take the fat end of my bone folder and or your butter knife, that's kind of the weighted handle end, and just lightly go over the corner surfaces, applying a really even but very light pressure, especially if you're working with a metal knife, onto the corner. I'm both going on top and on the side to create really nice creases and providing a really good edge contact and quality. This is not only going to help with just the aesthetics of your book, but also the finer tune crafting of your book to ensure that when you apply the glue, that all areas of the paper will be securely connected to that chipboard substrate beneath. When working with your knife, I cannot stress this enough, you have to use very light pressure, especially if you're working with a metal knife. You will be surprised, even if it's not the serrated side. Also, never ever work with a serrated side, but even if it is a butter knife and it does have a slightly serrated side like my butter knife does, you always want to make sure that you're not working with that cutting side, essentially, right? You always want to work with the top portion, the slightly bent and dull side. Now, I want to make sure too that you're not going and grabbing a metal knife that has any kind of cut capability. You want to be working with a low or very dull knife, right? And even with those dull knives, you'll be very surprised that you will be able to cut quite easily through paper. So you want to make sure that you're applying really light pressure. Now when we get to the corners, this is also going to be really important. As you can see, I'm using my bone folder and I'm kind of going back and forth, kind of zigzagging around the corner. What this is doing is it's providing a small little crease to that little bit of paper that's folded over there, and I'm also wrapping the paper around that corner. So once again, this is going to ensure, once I apply glue to this section, that it's going to be well secured to my substrate and to the paper. All right, now once again, I'm going over and I'm just evenly applying pressure to the sides and the back of my paper cover to the substrate. Now you'll also notice too that I have a really kind of even kind of application of my cover to my substrate, meaning that I am using both the left and right panels or leaves, and I'm applying those first, and then the top and bottom sections of the leaves are being then folded over. So this is a good crafting tip when working with paper. I will have a little bit of a lip kind of over that you'll be able to see just of an overhang just between my accordion paper that's stacked inside. So I want to make sure that my crafting is a good quality, and since it is a book, it's a much more intimate object. Your viewer will be able to really be aware of your crafting. So make sure that when you're crafting your cover that you're taking a holistic approach. So start with both the left and right side, fold those over first, and then to kind of finish it off, make sure that your top and bottom leaves are going on top of that. Let's go ahead and dive into the gluing section of this demonstration video. So I am using Yes Paste here. That's just my preferred glue that I work with. I also just have abundance of it in my studio and it's about to go bad, meaning that it's drying out, so I have to use this first. But if you are working with a heavier paper, let's say a lot of students like to do drawings for this assignment or work with some gouache for this, and you are working with a heavier paper, I would recommend using your white tacky glue. Now I'm using an old brush to apply this. I'm going to recommend also, if you are using an old brush, to make sure that you are cleaning out pretty well after you use it, and also to remind you to always use some type of glue paper. Gluing paper is going to be really helpful for maintaining good craft and making sure that you don't gunk up your surfaces that you might draw on or cut on in the future. So as you can see, I'm just using some basic paper. I'm using an old brush to apply my glue, and I am just using my glue paper, and I am working from the center all the way out to the edge. I am not making sure that I over glue my paper. This is a common mistake, especially if you're working with tacky glue. It does have a lot of water in it. You want to make sure that you're evenly applying it, but you're not coating the paper in like a huge dollop of glue. So make sure that you are maintaining good craft and you're not over gluing your page, but you are putting glue all over the entire image. Now I am also going to slightly coat my matte or my chipboard here too, to ensure that I am fully coating my chipboard and my cover page. This is just going to secure my image really well to the cover, to secure good craft and to make sure that it won't fall off or be damaged in the future. So I'm going to go ahead and just lightly place my chipboard in the center of my cover. Now the really great thing about my cover at this point is that I have used my bone folder or my metal makeshift bone folder to really provide a nice crease so it just naturally fits in there, so you won't really have too much of a registration problem if you create a good bone folder crease on your paper cover. I'm going to go ahead and transfer this image over. Notice how I keep transferring different types of glue papers and making sure that you replace those glue papers to make sure that you have good quality craft throughout your entire bookmaking process. We will be using a lot of glue, and you will be coating glue all the way to the edge of your cover, and 9 times out of 10, especially when you're gluing it to a paper, or all the way to the end, right? You're going to have some glue that gets on the outside. So go ahead and make sure you transfer your image after it's been fully glued to a new glue paper. As you can see, I am wiping my hands off here too in between gluing sessions to make sure that I don't have any glue on my paper, because all of that glue is going to transfer to the top of my book cover, and I don't want any gunky residue of glue that's just going to make bad craft and a bad looking book. So I'm making sure to wipe off my tools with a damp paper towel that I have sitting next to me. This is a good crafting tip, so make sure that you not only have a wet paper towel, but you also have a dry paper towel. Especially working with paper, any type of liquid surface or liquid that you add into paper will weaken it. So you really want to keep the liquid really down to a minimum. As you can see, I am creasing the paper fully with my fingers here and cleaning them in between. And I'm also going in on these little side corners and creating a nice incision with that glue, but also making sure that I press it down thoroughly. Notice how I'm using my fingers to slowly work the paper over those edges, and I'm securing the edge of my paper to that substrate of the chipboard below. Now I'm working from right to left left, right? I'm working from the outside going inside of my paper, and I'm securing that paper fully onto the board. I'm also using my bone folder to secure a really strong bind. So now once again too, I'm going back over, notice those little tiny corners of that paper. I am pressing them tightly together and making sure you wipe off your fingers once again. And then once again, we're going to just rotate our fingers lightly under our cover paper and just fold it over. So I'm going to also just apply just a little bit of glue here on those little corners to ensure that they stick well. As you can see, me using my fingers to lightly rotate the page or leaf over onto my substrate. I'm using my fingers once again, and I'm using that bone folder to slightly curve over the corners, as well as to fully press down my paper onto the mat board. Using your bone folder in this way is really going to ensure a good quality connection between paper to substrate or that chipboard beneath. I really want to talk about that for just another few minutes here. So we're not only going to use the bone folder as a way to kind of create creases and indents for our chipboard or our substrate of our book, to create that kind of crease for it to sit in. But we're also going to use the bone folder as a gluing mechanism, right? So it's going to be used in tandem with the glue and to create a really strong fix between the paper and that substrate. So what we're going to be doing is using our bone folder, or if you don't have a bone folder, of course, you can use that knife. And what I often end up doing, because that knife, if it is metal, is so harsh, is end up using a credit card. This is an old, like kind of trash credit card that I have that has just made its permanent home now in my studio, and I essentially use this as like a type of squeegee. So I not only go on the front surface of my cover page, but I also use it as a way to squeegee out the excess glue on the back side of my book covers. This is not only helpful for getting out any excess glue, but it's also really important for using that flat, flexible kind of plastic to ensure that all of the surfaces of your paper are fully connected to your chipboard. And this is a really good crafting tip for not only presentation, but just maintaining good paper and glue integrity. So as you can see, I'm really going over all of the surfaces really thoroughly. I am being gentle with the plastic, making sure that I am using it at an angle when I put it down. I am applying an even pressure. It is a little bit harder than what I would recommend for using a metal knife, because once again, that metal could really damage your paper if you use a heavy pressure. But if you do have a plastic credit card, this can be a really useful tool for a squeegee. And in some senses, I've even seen some students use it as kind of a type of bone folder even to create some impressions. I also want to talk about too, just cleaning up after yourself when working with glue. This is a messy process in some sense because you're working with glue, so maintaining good craft is going to be really helpful. For my paper, I'm using just a damp paper towel and a regular dry paper towel. If your paper is delicate at all, or if it's white, I would not recommend using any type of water. If you do notice there are a little bit of hiccups or glues, you can just simply kind of go over those lightly. I noticed there was a couple little just dried up glue pieces that were left on my surface. They were just in like two spots, and I just wanted to clean it up a little bit with a dry paper towel, so I just simply went over it really quickly. And once again, I would always recommend washing your hands or keeping a damp rag or towel next to you as you work to make sure that you're wiping off your hands in between your gluing process. This can be whether this is like your squeegeeing, whether you're using your bone folder to press out the extra glue, or if you're just, putting down to or taking your leaves and putting them down and attaching them to your chipboard. It's going to be really helpful to make sure that your hands stay clean throughout this entire process. Make sure also too to replace your gluing paper often. Every time that you reapply a new coat of glue, you should probably switch out your page. That's just a good little crafting tip.
All right, so we are at the very end of our accordion book cover process for this section of the video. So at this point in time, you should have two fully completed and made covers both front and back for your accordion book. They should look like this, right? So both accordion covers are covering your supported chipboard substrate, and they are glued and attached and fully squeegeed out on both the front, sides, and back of your chipboard. So it should look like this. It should be cool to the touch and damp at this point. So this is a really important last final step for creating the accordion book cover. What we're going to do is we're going to take our two chipboard pieces and cover pieces, and we're going to just lightly clean them up. So if there's any excess glue on top, what we're going to do is just simply take a damp paper towel, very, very damp, low moisture, and then slightly lift off any excess glue that's on this back surface. If there's any type of glue or imperfections on the front of the surface, you might want to run a dry paper towel. And if you have a treated surface, like a painted surface like this, it can even maybe support a little bit of a damp paper towel running over this. If you have delicate paper, or if you're working with a white surface, I would not recommend using a damp paper towel on the front of the cover. What you can do instead is just let that glue dry and then maybe pick it off later if you have any kind of glue that is stuck to the front surface. What I might also recommend for this next step is maybe going into your kitchen once again, and if you have any wax paper or saran wrap, simply lay a sheet down on top of this. So when this goes to dry, your surface of the cover will be hitting a saran wrap or wax wrap sheet below. And then you might even want to put a second sheet of wax paper or saran wrap on top. Put this on a flat, clean surface, aka that saran wrap's going to come in handy there. And then go find a nice, very heavy stack of books and gently put this on top of your book covers. And I stress the fact you want to gently place this on top. If you just throw it on, that could actually disrupt some of the paper and the way it's fully attached to your chipboard, and that can just make for some bad quality craft. So gently place a heavy stack of books on top and let them dry for anywhere between 4 to 24 hours. I know that's a hefty time, but this is really going to depend on your personal environment. This is going to be based on humidity in the room as well as temperature of the room. And like I said, your dry time can vary quite a bit student to student and household to household. So it's really just going to depend on your particular environment. After it is done, and you can check this by simply feeling this just lightly. If it feels kind of cool to the touch, it's still damp and it still needs to be dried under weight for a remainder period of time or an extra amount of time. So it's really going to, just like I said, depend on your personal environment. Make sure that these are drying under weight for the whole entire time. So this is going to be really, really important, especially for good quality crafting. If you don't let them dry under weight, they will warp or bow, and that could be really damaging for your final product of the accordion book. All right, so now that these are dried, they are fully treated, they're dry to the touch, they don't feel cool, we are ready to start on the interior of our accordion book, and that's making our accordion paper that goes inside our covers. So we're going to talk about paper now. We're moving on to our second section of the video. We're going to talk about what kind of papers to use, how to fold them, how to measure them, some good quality crafting tips, and gluing tips for our paper for our accordion book center. All right, let's go ahead and dive in. All right, so there are 3 different ways you can essentially make your accordion book paper or cut it out. So I'm just going to essentially focus on one method for my demonstration, but I just want to show you some different options here. So first off, you can cut pages individually. So obviously each individual page is going to be 4 by 6. But what you can do is you can essentially cut out a 4 or a 6 long ways dimension and then make this 8, right? So you're just taking those 2 pages and making it a 6 by 8. So essentially what you're going to do here, if you choose to do this method, is you're going to cut out a series of paper sheets like this. Essentially there'll be 2 pages. and then you'll just essentially connect the backs together. This makes for a really strong book because you're just double laminating essentially. As you can see, you're just going to connect one back sheet to another back sheet, and that's going to create an accordion. The downside of this is there's a lot of cutting, obviously. You have a lot of paper that you'll be using, but this can work if you have, kind of smaller paper pads that you're working with, or if you want a really strong book. Like I said, and then from there, you would just go on and complete this accordion style work by just laminating the book pages. I would recommend too, after you do glue your paper, that you always stack it under weight. So once it is glued and set up, just go ahead and take some books and gently place it on top of this, let it dry. Like I said, anywhere from for your paper, anywhere from maybe like 2 to 18 hours. It's really just going to depend on dry time. I am giving you a little bit less time for dry time on your paper, just because there are less kind of heavy, dense things that are being glued together. Your paper is going to be more consistent. It's not paper to chipboard, so you can have a little bit less dry time on this. But this is really going to help just solidify, once again, ensuring that your paper is fully fused together. There's no warping or rippling that happens, and this is just going to solidify that drying process. All right, so let's move on to the second method. Essentially, you just work with one large continuous sheet and just fold your paper in an accordion style. So this is one long continuous sheet. There is no glue attached at any point fusing these paper segments together. This is all just one long sheet. If you have an 18 by 24, you can go ahead and cut that sheet down to 6 inches tall, and then just cut this lengthwise to 24, and then I believe you'll get pretty close to the page requirement for this project. If not, you may end up having to do an additional sheet or something like that and just stack it together like so, or like so, right? So that maybe is something that you might have to do on an 18 by 24. Double check your math and make sure that you're having enough sheets. I am counting sheets as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So just make sure that you have enough individual sheets here to make up that 10 sheet front facing side requirement. All right, so let's move on to the third kind of way that you can handle this project. And this is actually going to be the one that I'm demonstrating in this video. And essentially you make sections of 4s or sections of 6 papers. The reason I'm doing it this way is because it's a little bit easier for me, and also my base paper size that I chose for my Bristol board was 14 by 17. Essentially for me, I'm going to have to cut out 3 sheets or 3 panels that will have 4 pieces of paper in it. And then I'm going to then use those pieces of paper and connect them all together. And that's going to essentially make up my 10 pages for the front and my 8 pages for the back. So essentially, once again, like all the other processes where you imply gluing with paper, when you go to connect these kind of connecting panels or sheets, make sure that they are fully connected, and then you gently place some weighted textbooks on top and let it dry completely under weight. So these are just some demonstration methods. Like I said, I'm going to be working with a segmented kind of 4-panel system like this. So I'm going to go ahead and just show you how I am thinking about this and working through the process. Let's go ahead and break down the math. So I want to just open up my example book that I have already made. This is going to be the essentially the accordion book that I will be making and completing at the end of this video. But I just want to walk through the math just to make sure this makes sense and it's all visually explained, so it's a little bit easier for you guys to understand. So essentially what I'm asking you to make is I am asking you to think about the front-facing side of your book. Now, the size requirement and the page requirement is that you have 10 pages being the front facing side of your book. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So that's going to be the front facing side of my book. Now on the back side, we're going to have 8 pages. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's going to be the back side of my book. And that's what I'm asking for this project. Now to measure this out, each individual page, so this is one individual page right here, is going to measure out 4 by 6. Now you can change the orientation if you want to have a book that is going horizontal, and you have your tall dimension being 4 and your horizontal dimension being 6, that's also fine too. For me, I just kind of like a little bit more of a traditional kind of vertical oriented book. So my dimension is going to be 4 by 6. So essentially what we're going to do is we're going to multiply 4 10 times, right? So that's going to give us 40 inches. All right, so that's how long this entire section really is if we were to expand it all the way out. If you don't believe me, we can double check with a good old handy ruler. And we can essentially put this down. I'm going to have to probably do this off screen. But as you can see, each panel section or page section is going to be 4 inches, right? So all of this, and I'm going to have to take this off screen lightly, so just bear with me. All of this, if we track it, 24, 28, 32, 36, and 40, right? So this is going to be essentially the paper dimension lengthwise that I'm asking for to complete 10 pages that are facing forward and creating the front of our book, and 8 pages creating the back of our book. Now, as I mentioned, I'm going to be working with kind of a segment panel here. So that means I only had my Bristol board, my vellum Bristol board that I am using is, it comes in 14 by 17 sheets. So that means I essentially had to make 3 different sized panel sections like this, equaling out 16 inches. All right, so I have to fuse them essentially on the 4th page. So right here, this is an area where I had to fuse one panel together, and this is another area where I had to fuse the panel together. So as you can see, and let me just go over that again in case that didn't register, this is an area where I had to fuse my segment of 16 inches together, and then this is another area where I had to fuse that section of 16 together. And that once again gave me those 10 forward-facing pages and those 8 backward-facing pages. All right, so that's kind of the simple breakdown of the math here. I don't think I can make it any kind of more understandable than that, but if you need me to work you through this again, I get it, because it's math and sometimes that could be a little bit challenging if you're not physically touching the material. But if you need to rewatch this, go ahead and rewind this and hear me explain this again, or just ask me in class and I can talk to you about it a little bit more. All right, so that's the simple breakdown of the math for this book. Like I said, if you're good with math and you're good with numbers and you have a lot of shop experience, feel free to kind of play with the numbers. You can, once again, like I said, make this book longer if you want, adding more pages. You can also make it a little bit wider or taller if you want to, and you can play with the dimensions. The minimum size, though, is a 4 by 6 book. And I want 10 pages facing forward and 8 pages facing backward.
I'm going to go ahead and speed up the video a little bit while I cut down my 14 by 17 vellum Bristol board pieces of paper. Now, as I mentioned, I'm going to be working in segments of 16 inches, so I'm going to have to cut down 2 sheets of 14 by 17 Bristol board vellum into 6 by 16 page segments. That's going to give me 4 pages total for my 4 by 6 pages that are going to make up my interior of my accordion book. So if this is a little bit confusing, please, like I said, stop, rewind or rewatch this video as many times just so you can get a good grasp on the numbers and the math that is needed to complete the minimum size requirement and page requirement for this particular accordion book. All right, so what I am doing is at the top and bottom sections or zones of my 6 by 16 panel page, I am just essentially measuring out 4 inches. So I'm measuring at 4, I'm measuring at 8, I'm measuring at 12, and then I'm marking my 16. So I'm going to have a little bit of an inch remainder there that I'm going to have to trim off, and that's okay, but I'm just going to go ahead and cut out this paper now, essentially on my line. As you can see, I just drew out a line so it was a little bit more easy to register on the video. You can feel free to do that yourself, or if you want to keep it a little bit more clean, just use a little tiny tick at both the top and bottom of your 6-inch measurement. All right, so as always, make sure you have a nice clean blade to cut out your Bristol board. My knife is getting a little bit dull at this point, so I'm going to have to probably change it here soon. But I was able to cut out a nice 6 by 16 inch segment here. So I double checked my measurement to make sure that was right. Now I'm going to go ahead and start creating the creases that are going to make up my paper folds for my interior accordion book. As you can see, I am lining up my ruler on the 4-inch mark, and I am scoring it with my bone folder. And I am going over it probably around 3 to 4 times. My bone folder is made from plastic, so it's going to have a much softer edge. So I'm able to apply a lot more pressure. If you are using a metal butter knife or a credit card, I would recommend going with a lighter pressure, more specifically for the metal butter knife. Even though you're going to be using the dull end, the rounded end, the paper will cut if you push too hard with a metal instrument. So you need to make sure that you're being real careful here. Now I want you to watch how I'm folding this. I am going back and forth from front to the back side of my paper and creating my folds. So as you can see, I'm also taking that bone folder and applying a forward and backward pressure to create a really nice fluid seam, creating my accordion fold. This is going to be absolutely critical for your creation of your accordion book. Now also, I want to give you a really important crafting tip here. I'm not actually putting my ruler on the exact 4-inch mark. Your fold that you're going to be creating with that bone folder line is actually going to be about a 1/16 of an inch. So what I am doing is just slightly pushing the ruler a little bit back towards the left, and I am just creating my crease there. So it's going to measure out perfectly to 4 inches, but I'm not lining my ruler up directly on 4 inches. This is just going to make for a more even and true 4 by 6 page. As you can see, I just cut off the last little remaining bit of my paper, which was just that inch overhang from my 6 by 17 page segment, and so now it's truly a 6 by 16 page segment, equaling out a 4 by 6 pages for 4 pages. Now I'm going to go ahead and repeat this process 2 additional times. Remember, I'm going to have to make 3 of these segments to complete my 6 by 40 inch page measurement. That's going to make up my 10 pages for the front and my 8 pages for the back. I'm going to go ahead and rinse and repeat this until all 3 of my paper segments that will measure out to 6 by 16 are completed. Then I'm going to go ahead and start with the gluing process. And that's going to pretty much take us into the end of our video. Of course, I've got some good crafting tips for gluing that we're going to talk about, and how to put all of these different components together and make sure that we have good, successful craft. I'm also going to, at the end, talk about some additional kind of features that you can add to your book that's really, really going to help just add some personal quality or nice personal touches, like pop-outs or little tiny pockets that you can create within your book. So make sure to watch towards the end of the book as well. All right, so we will go ahead and dive into gluing after this segment. All right, so we are done with cutting down our pages for our accordion book. So let's go ahead and talk about good crafting, gluing, and how we make sure that we're registering our pages properly. So this is actually one of the most difficult parts and easiest parts to kind of mess up in the accordion bookmaking process. So essentially what you can see here that I did is that I found the backs of my paper and I put a little tiny X on the sides. This is just letting me know that this is the proper and right orientation for my book, and this is where I need to glue these paper segments together. I'm going to be using a glue stick. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sandwich my glue paper in between my book page, and I'm going to use my glue stick and work it over the entire page. Notice how I am going corner to corner. I'm working through the entire center all the way to the edges and really making sure that I'm applying a nice even coat. Not a gunky coat, but a nice even coat. Now I'm going to go ahead and do the second page. Once again, I'm applying a nice even coat. I'm making sure it's not gunky, but I am lining all those corners and edges properly with the glue stick. Now I'm going to go ahead and double check and make sure that this is the right orientation. I'm going to do that by essentially just eyeing it and seeing if it fits together in the right way. You want to have your paper attached like this so it is one even and continuous zigzag essentially back and forth. It's pretty easy to screw this step up, so just make sure that you're slowing down, you take your time to look at the registration, and you make those little marks or indicators to yourself on which pages go together. Some people have different registration marks. For me, I just like X's because I think they're a little bit simple. And essentially, you want to have the end of your page going up to a corner of the page. So this is going to complete that continuous zigzag or accordion style paper. Essentially, I'm just lining up corner to corner. I'm both looking at the front and back side of the paper, and I'm making sure that I'm just slightly now moving it around a little bit with my fingers and my thumb to make sure that it is properly synced up and that it is completely flush on both the top and bottom, left and right sides of the page. After this, I'm going to go ahead and just do a little bit more wiggling around just to make sure that's right. I'm putting it down on the table too just to make sure it's nice and flush, meaning that it is going to line up on top and bottom so it's registering properly. And then I'm going to go over it with my hands a few times, make sure that there's no glue that got rubbed off on the other pages. You can see me just lightly removing it with my fingernails. And now that I gave it the once over, I'm going to put some nice pressure on top of it, and I'm going to put it under some weight. After I've waited for my two paper sections to be dried fully, I'm going to then move on and put my third and final segment and attach it together to complete my full accordion book paper. And lastly, a real quick reminder, make sure to use your bone folder to go over your paper after it is glued before you put it under weight to dry. We are at the kind of completion part of our book at this point. So in front of you, you can see that I have my two completed covers, and I have my accordion book paper that is all dried and put together. So what I'm going to do now is make sure that I have some glue paper handy on the side. I have got my glue and my glue brush ready to go, as well as a damp paper towel and a regular paper towel in case there's any hiccups. So I'm going to go ahead and start applying glue. I am using Yes Paste here, but I highly recommend using your white tacky glue or glue stick, just depending upon the type of paper that you are using. So be cautious about paper weight and paper quality. As you can see, I am applying the glue with a brush. I'm working right up to the edges. As I mentioned, my cover is a little bit larger than my actual paper size because I wanted a little bit of a lip. So I'm working pretty close right up to the edge, but I am allowing that kind of small space that is going to be a lip between my cover and my paper to be completely dry and clear and free of glue. So just make sure that if you do have a lip on your cover to not glue that section. I'm going to go ahead and apply some glue to the center and work out on the back of my cover. Make sure that both covers are full of glue and they are well crafted. I would recommend working with a glue page under your cover just to make sure that you're being nice and safe. I am not, so that's tisk tisk on me. So hopefully I don't spill any glue on my nice new beautiful blue mat. All right, so go ahead and make sure that you have a nice clean line presented here, that all of the glue is evenly distributed throughout the entire cover page, and make sure it's not too much glue. You want to just have just enough to coat the page or your board so that your paper will stick, but it won't get all gunky or bleed out or be pushed out. As you can see, I've got just enough. I'm working with Yes Paste. It's a little bit of a thicker glue, and it is more of a paste glue, so it's going to appear like it's thicker, but I promise it's not. So if there's any excess areas that are not glued, make sure to double check before you put your paper down. I'm doing that right now. My image cover that I was working on is a little bit more of a glossy, waxy surface, so the Yes Paste kind of separates a little bit. Now for registration, I actually have little keyholes or little kind of key corners set in on all 4 of my corners, so it's really easy for me to register my page on my actual cover. So I would highly recommend just pre-measuring your page to your cover and how it's going to fit before you go to glue. Like I said, I've got these little tiny corners on both the top and bottom section of my corners on my cover, so it's really easy to kind of see where my page is going to fit in. Like I said, I would highly recommend doing this before you go to glue. This is just another general crafting tip that'll help you out when it comes to gluing your page together. This is the final portion of assembling your book. Of course, you can do extra things to your book once it's made, but this is kind of the end of the book making process. So you want to make sure you're doing your due diligence and making sure that you're holding up all of that good craft and all of that wonderful work that you've put in so far. Okay, now I'm going to go over essentially and just double check and make sure that everything is registered correctly, that it's fitting nicely in my page. I'm going to go ahead and fully secure it just with some decent pressure from my hands, and then I'm going to let my book dry under weight again. Of course, this is going to be very dependent on how humid your environment is, how warm or cool your room is. So just go ahead and put your book under weight and let it dry for anywhere from 4 to 24 hours. All right, so we're going to go ahead and talk about a little bit more advanced crafting techniques. So this video is really about making the accordion book, right? We talk about crafting, we talk about gluing, papers, how to make the cover, how to make the accordion paper, and then how to assemble all of that. But there are some extra things that you can do with your accordion book. And so I want to dive into additions that you can make to your interior accordion book, such as pop-outs, pockets, or little tiny paper that you might add to your internal accordion paper structure inside your accordion book. So what I'm going to be demonstrating are essentially 2 main things here. First, I'm going to talk about an accordion book that has a pop-out page. So how you might make a pop-out page and how you would craft that, and then also how to make a pocket to go on your accordion paper. So these are just 2 very simple kind of addendums that you can add or put into your accordion book to make it a little bit extra, if you will, and just add some extra quality of texture or character or some more nuance to the inside of your book. So to begin, I'm just going to go ahead and use the same paper that I used to create my accordion book. So I'm using a 14 by 17 vellum Bristol board piece of paper, and I'm going to be cutting it down. To first begin, I'm going to essentially be making a leaf or a little pop-out page. So essentially this page is going to be attached to my accordion book structure, and it's just going to be lightly raised off of the page. So essentially it's going to be a 6 by 8 page. So it's going to cover 2 pages of my accordion book. And I just wanted to have some cut-ins, and I'm going to draw some organic kind of structure on both pages just so that there's a nice little pop-out section that can happen inside the book. Like I said, this is just kind of additional or extra information. You don't have to do this, but I always like to demonstrate this just because there are some students that want to play around with additional features that the accordion book can offer, and I always just like to have extra content in my class. So let's go ahead and talk about how to make a little pop-out page. So first off, I am basically just cutting down my page. As you can see, I had a larger piece of Bristol board that I was working from. Now I am double checking my size. Like I said, my pop-out page is going to cover 2 pages of my book, so it's going to measure out to be 6 by 8. It's technically going to be a little bit larger on the lengthwise. The reason I'm making it a little bit larger is because I'm going to have to create attaching leaves. So these leaves are going to be folded behind my page, and essentially that's what's going to be attached to my accordion book paper, so my paper will will be able to be popped out a little bit. So to kind of explain what I'm doing right now, I'm essentially measuring 1/4 of an inch, a really small little space here, and I'm going to use my bone folder to essentially create a little crease in the paper so I can fold it back. You can also use your credit card too if you have one of those lying around and you want to use that as kind of a line making structure. I'm just going to use my bone folder because I have it. Obviously, you can use your knife. I recommend always going over at least 3 times. You can go over it a little bit less or a little bit more, just depending upon the pressure that you apply with your hand. For me, comfortable 3 times usually works fine. So I'm going on now the right side of my page, and I am scoring the paper to create a nice little crease so my paper will easily fold over. Now what I'm doing is I am creating the center of my pop-out space. So this is going to be directly in between my pages, and this is what's going to create a perfect little pop-out. Now I'm going to go ahead and fold over those leaves. These are the leaves or the lips of the paper that's going to essentially be attached or glued to my internal accordion book structure. So I'm going to go ahead and flatten out this space and create that nice strong crease with my bone folder and just fold it over and apply some pressure with my bone folder. That's what I'm doing right now. As you can see, I initially started with my hands and then I create it with the bone folder. Now bend your paper in half slowly and steadily, and go ahead and use your bone folder to create a nice solid crease. Now I've got a nice pop-out page. As you can see, I'm going to go back and forth over this seam. That's going to be the middle seam, which is going to be popped out in my book, so it can go back and forth and be folded in both ways. So just to illustrate again what this might look like, I'm going to go ahead and take my accordion book example, and I'm going to place my little pop-out page in my accordion book. So the leaves that are small, those little 1/4 of an inch or 1/4 of an inch kind of leaves that I've created, the ones that I'm kind of slightly pulling apart right there, are going to be essentially glued and attached to the very corner ends of this part of my book. This is going to be able to create a pop-out section. You're going to essentially just use a glue stick or a little bit of your white tacky glue. You're going to run a glue stick clearly across that space, making sure that it's fully coated. Like I said, you could also use tacky glue. You can really go in either way with a Bristol board vellum, just whatever is going to fuse the best. I think I end up settling on my Yes Paste or my heavier glue, so your white tacky glue, just because I think my Bristol board was it was a little bit too strong for my glue stick. So essentially this is what it's going to look like. And then once you have it all glued together, this little page will be able to be popped out. But then when you fold it back up, it'll sit comfortably in between your accordion book and be able to be folded up and function like normal. So that's going to be essentially what a little pop-out example might look like, right? And obviously this isn't glued, so it's not fully popping out like it should, but that's going to see essentially what we're doing or what we're making. Like I said, you can cut into this space with some really interesting shapes. You can, make a kind of illustrated scene. You can cut a window. You can cut a silhouette of a tree or a human form, really whatever you want, and it could be just a nice little creative kind of addition to add to your book. All right, the second thing that we're going to talk about is creating a pocket. So a pocket can be really useful for this book for creating little sections of mementos to be housed or stored, placing other types of drawings or maybe knickknacks or even small little objects to be held inside your book. I personally love little pockets in my books, and I have done this in the past quite a bit. It's going to be pretty similar to our pop-out page. We're going to have to be attaching our little pocket page with leaves. So essentially I'm going to be measuring out a leaf that's going to fit in between a 4x6 page. And remember, I only want one pocket just to span that 4x6. I'm measuring out my pocket to 3 3/4 to 2.5. Of course, you can scale your pocket up or make it smaller, just depending upon how you want it to fit in your page. So for me, I am just doing a 3 by 3 1/4 and a 2.5 kind of size pocket. Of course, on my 3 3/4 side, I'm going to be adding a 1/4 inch to both the left and right side, and then on my bottom size, which is going to be the 2.5 measurement, I'm going to be adding just a 1/4 to the bottom. So the 4th kind of measurement, that 1/4 measurement, those are going to be my lips that are glued, folded over, then glued and attached to my paper. So when this is all put together, of course my pocket is going to be 3 3/4 by 2.5. So hopefully, if those measurements are just a lot of numbers raining out, hopefully this makes sense once I put it all together and I have the completed and final pocket. Okay, so what I am doing now is I am just going to measure out those 1/4 inch little leaves. So it's going to be very similar. I'm going to use my bone folder to create a crease to fold this over. I'm also going to measure this out on both the left, right, and bottom side. And I'm just going to create that crease going over it anywhere from 3 to 4 times with my bone folder. I'm going to go ahead and fold over my left and right leaf sides. Remember, the leaves are going to be glued and attached to my paper. As you can see, I'm going to have to go over those little folds like normal with my bone folder to create a really nice strong crease and a really strong fold. Now what I'm going to have to do is create the bottom section. So I'm going to have to create a 1/4 inch to my bottom. Of course, this is going to be where my little image is going to slide down to. So this is going to be really important to make sure that this leaf is attached first and then my sides are attached afterwards. So I'm going to measure out 1/4 of an inch border, keeping it all consistent. Trace over it with my bone folder to create a nice even groove and a really nice line for me to fold over. But before I fold my bottom leaf out, I'm going to have to remove my corner paper. So what I'm doing is I'm just going to remove the corner square here of this little corner on my right and left side. So once again, this is the bottom section that I am just removing that corner. This is where, of course, that leaf is going to be folded over to make the bottom kind of cradle of my little pocket. So as you can see, I'm just removing that kind of square, and this is just going to help remove excess paper. So when I go ahead and fold that bottom section over and then connect my bottom section to my top leaves, it'll be a really kind of smooth transition, and it'll have just a little area for that paper to be glued with. Now I can go ahead and take my bone folder and work over the bottom passage, creating a really nice folding line. I'm going to slowly kind of bend my paper over, move some of this excess material out of the way, and make that fold. So essentially what I'm going to have to do first is I'm going to have to create a glued pocket. I'm going to have to let that dry for a few minutes, maybe like 30 minutes to an hour, just depending on dry time. And then I'm going to then take that glued solid pocket and then take those back parts and attach it to my accordion book. When you go to glue this, there's only going to be a little tiny corner on the left and the right that you're going to glue your first initial pocket. My thumbs are on them right now, so that's what you're going to glue. And then you're going to let it dry, and then you're going to glue the leaf parts. As you can see, I'm tilted up here. All of those spare leaves, you're going to glue those to your actual paper on your accordion book. So as you can see, I wrote back here. That's the back section, and then you're just going to attach that to your accordion book. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and grab my accordion book and just give you a little visual to explain how this might look in your finished book. As you can see, I'm just placing it on the page. Now, obviously, this isn't glued yet, and it's still in the prefab stage, but you'll get an idea of how this might look and how it might operate. Those glued or those little folded areas, those are going to be the leaves that are attached, and you're just going to glue those down. You're going to want to make sure this is a pocket, so don't glue anything on that back side of the open paper, but just keep it continuous and glued on the leaves, and you'll be fine. This is going to go ahead and conclude our little tutorial and demo for extra add-ins that you can add into your accordion book, the pop-out page, and our pocket. So I hope you had fun, and that's going to take us to the end of our video.
All right, so we are at the end of our video, and by this point you should have a fully completed and well-crafted handmade accordion book. So hopefully you enjoyed the video. Please rewatch and pause and go back, review anything that you need to review again. Hopefully you've enjoyed this video, and lastly, happy making!